Can we, have you got any comments on those? Can we agree those?
Agree.
Thank you. Apologies for absence. Got to. Next we need to add to your list Brian Adams. But apart from that, do you want to say?
I will really quickly. Apologies from Councillor Williamson, Councillor Mulliner and Councillor Piper. Councillor Townsend, Councillor Seabourn and Councillor Hyman are attending as substitutes.
Okay, well firstly welcome to our new member David Round, and welcome Liz, it's first time as a substitute to appear at this session, and Jim, welcome your attendance, and Tom, welcome to be here.
Thank you.
Okay, declarations of interest.
None sought before the meeting, Chairman.
Questions from the public?
None received.
Right. Medium-term financial plan, general budget. Graham?
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I'll just do a brief introduction on this, and then happy for Peter and I to take any questions from members. Chairman, back in July last year, we presented to Council an updated financial strategy, which really sort of paves the way for approaching the budget shortfall that we anticipated for 18-19. The big variations that we were looking at, and they totalled some £2.7 million over 3 years, and about £850,000 in 18-19. The main reasons for that were inflation, which we anticipated would increase, and of course it did over the year. Inflation on costs, that is. Also, we had the last bit of our government grant coming out in 18-19, so we were down to zero. And that also included a transitional grant that was given for 2 years, so that was another £210,000 coming out in total. Plus, Surrey County Council's budget difficulties, terrible issues with the costs of adult social care, etc., which is widely known about. The County Council over the last year or two have been looking at ways of saving money, and one of those ways was to re-look at how recycling credits are passed through to the collection authorities, the district and borough councils, and that was going to have an impact on Waverley, along with some of the other, all of the other southern boroughs, over the next 3 years, with an impact we were projecting of some £300,000 in next year. So all of that came to just over £800,000. Now since then, so between sort of July and now, all of the heads of service have been working through the detailed budgets, and they've been working through the high level budgets and looking at the medium term strategy. And we've managed to present to members tonight, and the same report is going to the other 3 overview and scrutiny committees as well, tomorrow night and then two nights next week, and then on to the executive. A proposal to balance next year's budget, and proposals to address the projected shortfall in the following 2 years' budgets, and I'll come on to that in a second. So the main changes in the current year have been that the officers have managed to negotiate with Surrey County Council some transitional arrangements on the recycling income reduction, which means over the 3 years there's the same level of reduction, but it pushes the impact further back into that 3 years. So that gave us a bit of help in balancing the budget by about £200,000 in next year. Inflation, actually, the cost of inflation was slightly higher than we were anticipating, but then coming the right way has been property income. We managed to, in the year, secure 4 properties actually, but two of them before we had started to pull these budget proposals together, and that property income has really supported us to be able to close our budget gap in next year. So a really important strategy that the council embarked on the year before with the Investment Advisory Board, and that is starting to really help our budget shortfall. So just working through the report, Annex paragraph 5 on page 16. I'll just refer there to new homes bonus. Members will be aware, hopefully lots of members attended our briefing sessions in September, October, and we took members through the financial strategy then. One of the issues we touched on was new homes bonus, and new homes bonus is, it should be what it suggests, which is a bonus that the government give to local authorities for net housing growth that is approved and delivered within their areas. Now, the government has changed the criteria for new homes bonus over the last few years, and that has had an impact on the amount of money we thought we would get from new homes bonus. Now, fortunately, the council very prudently agreed a strategy when new homes bonus came in that it wouldn't rely on new homes bonus to balance its revenue budget. Instead, it would use that income to support investor save schemes, and now a year ago the council agreed that it would put new homes bonus money into our property investment pot. So, if you like, it is like an investor save scheme, but very specifically to help finance our property acquisitions to generate revenue. So what that means is that whereas some authorities use their new homes bonus to balance their budget, and when the government cuts that back down, then that opens up their budget gap. Now, that isn't the case for us directly, although it does. Any reduction in new homes bonus gives us less money to invest in property. So it's not a good thing, but it hasn't widened the gap on our revenue budget. So that's new homes bonus. Fees and charges. There's in Annex 3 we're proposing through the work of the officers and the portfolio holders, proposing some changes to fees and charges. I don't propose to go through those in a huge amount of detail. I'm assuming members have had a chance to look through that, but that's part of the consideration for members tonight, so that any comments can be passed on to the executive. Pay awards. The pay award, paragraph 9, was agreed between the staff side, which is the representatives of the employees, and the joint negotiating committee, which is a group of councillors, and that was at 2%, and that just needs a final sort of ratification by council, but it is essentially agreed, and it's within all of the budget figures as well. In terms of capital spend, there's a draft capital programme within these papers, and paragraph 10 just explains that a fairly big proportion of our general fund capital programme is funded from a contribution from revenue. Now, that is something that historically has served Waverley well. It's enabled us to continue to invest in our assets, but it also does give us some flexibility, and if members feel they want to spend more of our revenue budget on enhancing our assets, then we can increase that or we can reduce it, and that either opens up or closes our budget gap accordingly. But certainly we feel at the moment, and the portfolio holder for finance feels it's appropriate to continue that at the £1 million level, and you can see from the annex on the capital programme that really helps to keep our leisure centres and some of our other assets in good condition. So, Chairman, just the report goes on to talk about the medium-term financial plan, and then there's some various assurances that as Waverley's Chief Finance Officer I have to give in terms of financial administration and adequacy of reserves. And that leads us on to council tax. What's proposed in this report is a council tax increase for 18-19 of the maximum amount that the government allows to do before it triggers a referendum, which for next year is 2.99%, which is a little over £5. So members will remember that on a Band D property. So last year the government allowed a £5 amount, and this year they're allowing £5 or 2.99, whichever is the higher, and it does vary across councils at a Band D, that is. So the proposal in here, which is consistent with the financial strategy that members agreed last year, is that we will use a council tax increase to help balance the budget. Now, as it happens, it's slightly less than CPI at the moment, so it is around the sort of inflationary level. Two other quick things on council tax, Chairman. Paragraph 31 in the Chancellor's budget, he announced a proposal to incentivise owners of properties, homes that are long-term empty, i.e. more than 2 years, to bring them back into use by allowing councils to increase the extra council tax premium that they can apply to those properties from 50% extra to 100% extra. So in other words, it doubles the council tax bill. The proposal here, which is supported by the portfolio holder, is that as soon as the government have put that through the legislative process and issued all the regulations, etc., that we actually apply that increase. So that is up for comment by members this evening. And then finally on council tax, paragraph 33, council tax support scheme, which used to a few years ago be called council tax benefit, but it's now a locally determined scheme of reductions to council tax for households on low income. We have a good scheme in place that the council agreed a few years ago. It's working well, and there's a proposal in here that we do not change that. We don't make any further changes, and we continue that scheme, and we're required to make a positive recommendation each year on that to council, so that's why that's in the report. Chairman, can I just finally turn to, if I can turn to Annex 2, which is on, find the page number, it's page 27. 27. So this really is just a summary, Chairman, of what I was talking about earlier. That top section shows the latest projection for over the 3 years of the budget shortfall, which comes to 3.1 million. That includes, you'll see a large figure in 2019-20 of £800,000. This is what we talk to members about in the budget briefings, which is a sort of a negative grant that the government have indicated that they will introduce into our base budget. And most of the other Surrey authorities have also got similar figures notified to them by the government. Now, we have been writing to the government since that was first indicated, and last year we wrote twice in response to consultations on the grant settlement, just explaining our unhappiness, I suppose, and the impact that will have on us. And the Chancellor announced in his autumn budget that he would review that in the spring and open a consultation to discuss how that policy will continue. And we are hoping that will either lead to that being removed, or at least reduced or deferred to a later year. It was all tied in with the new business rates funding mechanism, which the government's delayed now. So we're hoping that will be delayed as well. So we could do with that coming out next year to ease the pressure on our budget. So then below that, Chairman, we've taken the estimated council tax increase off and assumed that will be possible in the next 2 years, but obviously that's subject to council approval and indeed the government allowing an increase of that amount. And then the bottom section is all of the proposals that total 510,000 in 18-19 that the heads of service with their portfolio holders are proposing as a package of measures to close the remaining budget shortfall. And you'll notice there are some growth items in there as well, where the head of service and the portfolio holder feel there's a priority area for spending additional money. And there's some explanation in the right-hand column. And just the final point, Chairman, about future years, under the addressing the budget shortfall section, and again, coming back to the strategy that we agreed last year at Council, the 3 areas that we intend to target as part of the strategy are procurement savings, so in other words, reducing the cost of spending on goods and services, property income, so continuing our strategy for generating revenue from acquiring and investing in property, and then efficiency savings from customer service, investor save, and also from new and increased income. So we're setting out some targets there, and we intend to work with this committee and heads of service over the next few months to bring some proposals forward, so that we can start really thinking ahead well beyond next year's budget to put proposals in place, Chairman. I think that's pretty much all I want to say by way of introduction. I'll hand over to members, Chairman.
Thank you. Peter, do you want to add any of that?
No, I think Graham's
Members?
John.
Yes, we have. Well, I'll ask a question. What people think, I can't believe nobody's going to ask a question. If we go to Annex 2 and the property income target, you've got 250k in the next budget year. It would be interesting to know just what that's made up of and how conservative or otherwise it might or might not be, to give people the assurance or reassurance that that is achievable. I mean, I don't know to what extent, I presume it is taken from existing property investments, which we've already made, so it'd be interesting to see what that might be. And then going on from that, it seems to me the difficult year is the following year. That 800,000 is still there. And what are we looking to do to invest to achieve an additional 300,000 in the 2019-20 year? So what targets have we got to hit as we go through the year to make sure we actually generate that income in 2019-20? So we kick off with that. I'm sure somebody else has got a question around the table.
Jim, shall I address that question?
Please.
So the 250,000 that we're budgeting for next year is our estimate of net income from the two farming properties that we have already secured on late in December. So that income should be safe in our budget, because that's not in our current base budget. So in other words, and then I'll go on to answer the second part of the question.
Sorry, can I just clarify there? Because one of them's empty. Okay, I know they're paying rent until July or something. But
yes.
Does that take all that into account? So what are the projected figures, and what sort of contingency, if you like, have you built into that number to make sure it's a safe number? Because the whole of the balanced budget is pretty critical on achieving that investment income. So I think members would like to be reassured it is a conservative number, and there is some margin in there for perhaps some unforeseens as we go through the year.
Yeah. Okay, Chairman. So the gross income from those two properties is £470,000 a year, less the financing costs and less approximately £50,000 of a contribution to a reserve, gives you your 250. So completely accept what you say, Chairman, about one of the properties we're actively marketing at the moment, because from July onwards it won't have a paying tenant in, and we knew that, so we've got 6 months to let that, and we're getting a lot of interest from agents at the moment. But there is a risk, as we knew when we took that through council, that there could be a period where in between lets where we're not achieving income. So there is no allowance at the moment in there, Chamber, for any other income, any acquisition in 18-19 at all, which is pessimistic, because we've made 4 in the first year, and so I would expect that we will achieve income over and above that in 18-19, but we're not budgeting for that in here.
Okay.
So what I'm suggesting is that there's sufficient certainty around the income from the farming properties to achieve that, providing we can re-let one. But that's assuming we don't achieve any other investments at all over the year. So bearing in mind we are actively looking.
So it's premised on re-letting that one by July.
And not making any other investments at all
That's the offset.
in the next 15 months.
Okay. Members happy with that situation? Peter?
Oh yes, I think that's very good. Sorry, Was there more to say on that, or can I go on to another?
Should I just touch off because the second part of your question, Chairman, was about in future years, and the strategy that we're developing with the subgroup of this committee is looking at a property investment target at the moment of £30 million and over the next 2 years, and we're looking for a net return of 2%, and so that 2% is the 600,000 that you see coming in over the next 2 years, because that's 300 plus another 300 in the year after. So that aligns with the strategy.
Okay, but it's not predicated on any investment in site at the moment.
Correct. The 2 lots of 300 isn't. No.
Right. Okay. David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't quite understand. I thought the figures on this line of 250 this coming year, 300 and 300 were each for that year. Why are you saying they're cumulative?
So these are all additional on top of the previous years. So that is, as you look there, that's a new £850,000 coming in over the next 3 years. So at the end of the 3-year period, we'll have £850,000 annual income over and above our current year's budget.
These figures are the total for each year.
Yes, right. and so they're a change from the previous year's base. So our current year's budget, 17-18, will grow by 250,000 by the end of next year. That will then grow by a further 300 by the end of 19-20, and that will grow by a further 300 by 2021.
Well, that's more. Then I still don't understand. Harm if I'm being a little thick. Either that's the total projected income from these investments in that year, or if it's cumulative to the previous year, then it makes a mockery of the total on the right-hand side. Doesn't it?
Well, I'm saying that compared to the current year's budget, 17-18, at the end of the 3-year financial plan period, we will be generating an additional £850,000
per year.
Per year after that.
Per year.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Per year after that.
Okay.
Nick.
I was going to ask about the efficiency savings of £870,000. You don't explain exactly where these efficiency savings are coming from. Can you give us some idea?
So Chairman, this is a target for the year after next, that the head to service will be working up proposals, proper business cases in terms of income, investor save schemes, customer service work that David's leading on, and also efficiency reviews. And Peter's just been through the systems thinking review on benefits. So that was one review, and that's generated a recurring saving of £70,000. So all of those things together over the next 15 months will be coming forward for approval. So that, but we're not going to wait until next year's budget process. We're going to start now, and they will start coming through to via this committee to be worked up to ready to start before the beginning of 1920. So you're absolutely right, Councillor Hull. We don't have the detail now. That is a target to achieve, and that's the target that we would expect the head to service to achieve over all of those different areas.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Peter.
Thank you. Can I just say, I think what you've done is very impressive, and I congratulate you on a good-looking plan. And it's a fairly boring plan, and boring plans are good. But a couple of points. 65,000 a year is generated by increased garden waste subscriptions, and 240,000 is generated by an increase in statutory planning fees, which is quite a sizable chunk of money, and that's in excess of the amount of money which we get with an increase in council tax. So it's quite serious money. You've put an assessment in terms of the £5 on garden waste. You don't think it'll have any impact, and I'm sure that you're right. The one that I was most interested in was on page 42, which is the property and development services and surveyors' fees, where we've got increases here ranging up to 64.5% or 76%. I know that in this committee we've discussed that whole area, and I missed the last meeting, so maybe it was all discussed and I didn't really appreciate it there. Is that all in line with that discussion and with a revamped development surveyor's area? And are those figures really realistic? And are we going to risk people going to competition? I'm sure those questions were all asked at the last meeting, and I apologise if that's so, but I would quite like to hear it from you, Graham.
Chairman, they weren't asked at last meeting. This is the first members have seen of this, so that's fine. What these are, David, please add any comment. This is where members of the public come to us and say, I would like to do something to my property, whether it's any of these things you see, so a licence, discharge of covenant, request for a way leave, etc. And then what happens is, so this will be their own private property or a business, and it happens to be property where it goes over Waverley's land, where we've got some kind of covenant or an easement opportunity. And what happens is that Anne Keynes's team then process that, and at the moment we are losing money on that. It's costing more to process than we're charging the requester. And so Anne's reassessed the amount of time, and she's also looked at what other local authorities charge for that as well. So she's proposing that we recover our costs rather than make a loss on that when somebody comes to us to ask for that. That's what this is.
Okay, so I mean, and that I'm very happy with. My thought was that it is a captive market. They can't go somewhere else and ask for the service. Is that right?
That's correct.
So they've got no other place to go to.
Yes,
so,
that's correct.
Fine. Okay, because there were other parts of the surveyor's area where we were being competitive. And
I think we were talking about building control.
Oh, is that building control?
I think it was. I think we didn't actually touch on it last time, but it's an interesting paragraph on paragraph 7 on page 17. I was going to where anybody picked that up. Where the report suggests we're inviting a delegated authority to set these fees at a later date. And I wonder if members are happy with that and whether we want to comment on that aspect. If you actually look at the last couple of sentences on paragraph 7, fees and charges on page 17, you'll see what I'm talking about. And I think the last sentence says, this year to enable the service to be commercially responsible, Council has requested approved delegation for agreed fees to the Strategic Director, Chief Finance Officer and Planning Portfolio Holder. Now, are we content with that to go forward, or do we think we would like to see something back on this somewhat contentious area before we go back into this point?
Jim, just so do you mind if I just finish the Councillor Martin mentioned raise the planning fees? Do you want me to come back to that?
No.
Or
sorry, Peter.
No, it's a really good point, and I've got a view on that as well. But
do you want me to just finish?
Yeah, finish the planning fees, by all means.
Well, so the extra £240,000 that we're proposing from the government allowing us to increase by 20% our statutory planning fees, and we know that every planning authority in the country has taken that up, by the way, Elizabeth found out. The proposals just below that in the table that have all got an asterisk by it are proposals to spend that 240, so it's neutral in the overall equation. Because we can only increase by that 20% if we spend that income on improving the service. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 proposals below that the portfolio holder and the head of service have come up with to actually spend that 240,000, and they are all on areas that support the improvement plan that council approved recently with the with the external report that was commissioned. So I just wanted to make it clear that that's not extra income that's helping balance our budget, but it's extra income that's being reinvested in the planning service to improve it, because that's what we've got to do. That was all, Chairman. Sorry, I just wanted to come back to that point.
Okay. Peter, do you want to?
I was just wanting to find then where all that scale of fees, where is there a separate line for the increasing fees and what that generates, other than the statutory planning fees?
So the statutory planning fees is a one-liner in here.
Yeah, but what about the Annex 2 and all those fees that you're putting up? Where does that come? How much does that generate in the end?
building control
Oh,
fees?
so the figures on the planning side, James, that the
You've got the building control fee increase to 50,000, and you've got
Yeah.
the 240 from the statutory planning, but there were lots of other fees going up, and I just wondered whether they amounted to very much or not.
well, so there's the discretionary charging under planning, which is 29,000. So that's around pre-app advice for larger developments. So that's where the head of service, Elizabeth Sims, is saying there's an opportunity there with the volume of large applications coming in for them to generate income at a pre-application stage, particularly through performance agreements. And then the street naming and numbering net income 20,000. Well, we only get about 30,000 from that area now. And again, it's a bit like the surveyors' fees we're just talking about. We actually are not recovering the staff costs on those. So and Elizabeth's saying, well, we need to. This is where someone asks, either a developer needs their streets named or an individual wants the street name or number changed. And there's a lot of staff time involved in that. And so that's the proposal, to increase the charge to a cost recovery basis. But we can, you can do it.
Okay. Do you want to comment on the building control thing?
So the building control fees are around the business model that was being approved last year, where there was a fee increase which was supporting the increase in the salaries of the inspectors. Recruitment's been really difficult in that area to get building control inspectors. The market's really competitive. But also, it's not just competitive for the surveyors, it's a competitive market that we're operating in against the approved inspectors. So the service does need a degree of flexibility to be able to negotiate, not necessarily the individual small one-off home improvements, but more the commercial fees when they're dealing with bigger developers. The service needs that flexibility to respond quickly without having to come back to, and competitively, without having to come back to council every time it's wanting to be competitive in the market. So that's just the background that needs to be considered around fee setting, and hence the request to have the delegated authority so that we can respond more agilely to...
Are members content with that? Or they want to see more?
I think for that particular one that makes sense, although I think periodically I would quite like to see a report where we could understand just what happened, because if we suddenly double the fee or something and then half the income or something silly happens, I mean this committee needs to know. But I think I'm reasonably content in that.
But with that proviso, let's just finish this bit first. Anyone else talk on that same topic?
On that bit, if I may expand Peter Martin's point. In fact, I made this point last year and it doesn't seem to have changed. In all of these fees, there's pages of them, tens and dozens. There's no indication of how much they either cost to provide or how much revenue they will produce. And we have no idea how important they are without that. And the one where I raised a slight titter last year, was that on page, what's the 40. Help me, someone who knows this stuff. The squirrels and wasps and cluster flies. Now, I see the cluster flies cost a lot more than the wasps. I have no idea what they are. And the squirrel's now going to cost 100, here we are, page 54. The squirrel's going to cost 118 quid as opposed to 115. I'm sure that's perfectly valuable, but I don't know whether we do, or at least we do, is to one squirrel per annum or 10,000. 10,000 makes it worth considering. One doesn't. Can we not please have, and I'm sure last year we were promised to potentially be given to this in this page, in all of these pages, a column that says what the result is, the total.
Officers?
It's done, it will be in the...
You must have it somewhere.
Okay, sorry, they're promising to give it to you. Keep watching them, David, to see whether they actually do deliver this time.
No, just, what is it we do as
It's not here.
Do we kill squirrels or supply them? Or?
We kill them. We do it humanely.
David, can I encourage you to wait and see whether they actually deliver on their promise?
Thank you.
Because we've got a lot of other things to talk about.
I know it's true.
It is important, Chairman, and in fact we did ask the teams, and they gave this to us this afternoon, which has a column on. So if any members have a specific question about a block of charges, we can actually answer it. But apologies if we'd said we'd send that round with the papers, but we have got it here. So if there was a particular area, so the whole squirrel thing comes in with a number of others, and it generates £2,000 a year.
Okay. All right. We're getting there.
Thank you.
Richard.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. So on the same theme, being asked to scrutinise this, there's some presentation aspects that would just make it an awful lot easier. Talking to Annex 1, we have the final budget for the year, but that's made up of income and outgoings, and we don't know whether the change, based on what we've been given, we can't scrutinise whether cost of providing service has actually gone up a lot, but we've managed to generate even more income to hide it, or what. So actually, having this presented with income and outgoings for each line item, the thing that provoked me to this is the environmental services charge, which leaps out as having changed by 30%, and of course you'd explain that with the removal or reduction of the Surrey. But that had to be extra information, and it's kind of nice to have all of that so we can see where costs are going up year on year, or where income's going up. And this will come up when we talk about the budget improvement initiatives in the next section, because if we just focus on costs, we're going to go out of business fairly quickly, and we've got to be looking at the income side of the equation, I think, and so having that here I think would be really useful. So that was a general observation. The capital budget, again, it'd be interesting to know how much of that budget is actually contingency. What's actually going to deliver projects and what's actually going to be sitting there and used for the year. And we're discussing this in working group at the moment, so conclusions will drop out of that. But since this is the scrutiny opportunity, I think it's worth bringing it up. And do we actually have any reserve projects waiting in the wings for projects that for extra funds that become available during the course of the year for whatever reason?
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Well, okay, Chairman. First point around Annex 1. Yeah, point taken. Should we undertake to produce a version, again, trying to get the balance right between not giving you the full, absolutely everything and enough to scrutinise? We can get a revised Annex 1 with some more detail on in circulation, because clearly this budget goes to executive and then on to council, and I think if that gives members a bit more information, then we can deal with questions offline out of the committee, if that helps.
Agreed.
Indeed. I think this is important, because it coming out of the task group, the issue, one of the key issues coming out, two of the key issues, several coming out. One was the amount of contingency built into projects, and secondly, the lack of speed in replacing, when there are slippages or savings, replacing those projects with other projects quickly, so that our customers get the benefit of capital spend in the year, and huge sums of money don't get carried over into the subsequent year. So it's a crucial issue to be, from our perspective, to be able to rapidly insert additional projects as and when the funding becomes available, but without waiting for too long. So it's quite an important point, I think.
Yeah.
Jerry, you had a comment.
Yes, I didn't know whether you were going to chop this up in between, the main bulk of the report, which I found was very good actually. I mean, it's the scariest thing is actually starting on it, but once you got into it, I found it to be fairly clear, and I thank the officers for that. We've got a summary at the bottom of page 18. That's in paragraph 15, which sets out the different options, the different ways that we can address the budget shortfall. I've got a concern, obviously the easiest one, and possibly from a resident's point of view the very worst option, is to, where it says if necessary, it's a fine bullet point at the very top of page 19, if necessary, approve a council tax increase each year up to the maximum allowable by the government. We've got we're in the sort of borough where we've got a lot of people who are asset rich but cash poor, elderly, with pensions not getting much of a return, and we've got a lot of people, also the workers, who at the other end of the scale also, who don't have a lot of spare cash, and they certainly wouldn't want their council tax going up. It may be overshadowed by Surrey County Council's portion in the bill they're going to get through their door, but nevertheless we have to always, I think, look like East Hants did last year.
Have you got a question, Jerry?
Yeah, well, the issue here of not of whether there are other options or better options of trying to make up this £280,000 that we get from the 3% increase. I wondered, are there arguments? At paragraph 14, I think it was, or somewhere in here, I noticed that the government's going to consult with us later in the spring. And it looks like we're sort of being forced into a position where we have to put up our council tax, because otherwise, when we come to that consultation, when we're consulting on the other £800,000 or £80,000, they're going to turn around and say, well, you wouldn't, you'd have put your council tax up if you needed it, so we're not going to smile at you. Is that what we're being told? That's the way I've read it. I mean, is that a reasonable way to read it? And if so, what's our best argument in countering that? There must be some arguments that we can use to say that that's an unfair way of doing it, because you're hitting the hardest pressed in society, and we want to try and defend those people as best we can. So have we got good arguments?
Well, go on.
We fundamentally disagree with the negative grant principle in the first place, because we have sort of made a case that it's just not equitable, it's not reasonable. In terms of trying to sort of be much more sophisticated, well, it's quite difficult, because the government will say, well, we need to redistribute resources to harder pressed areas in the country, and they're looking at what they're calling their fair funding review at the moment, which takes the whole of local government funding across the whole council, and they're looking to, the whole country, and looking to sort their redistribution mechanism out so that it targets areas that are really experiencing difficulty. Now, they don't often consider that the southeast is in the same boat as some other parts of the country, and so to an extent we're always going to be up against the government's need to allocate fairly, in according to their formulas and methodologies, resources across the country. But we will do what we can to try and either limit the impact, defer it, reduce it. But we can only ask. But I think on the council tax point, whether the council's always got an option of not increasing council tax or increasing it by a lower amount. The proposal here is to increase it by whatever we can, particularly in the light of the fact that all of our government grants gone now. And so, and in fact, the year before, the government had almost hinted that they were expecting us to use the flexibility, as they called it, flexibility of the £5 on Band D, in order to address the reduction in the grants.
Can I suggest, that what we do is a comment to the executive, that we urge the executive to continue lobbying by all means possible, including persistent pestering of both our MPs to get this negative grant eliminated. Is that the comment we should be making?
I think this is the negative grant is a political thing. It's not an officer thing. And it's a disgrace. We shouldn't be saying. I think the council made a terrific mistake when it accepted the 4-year settlement. It should not have accepted the 4-year settlement, because it includes the revenue support, the negative RSG.
We are where we are, aren't we?
We are where we are.
So, but I do think we ought to pass in that message, is to continue and urge them to lobby extremely hard to make as much noise as possible. Anyway, Where are we going now? Have you finished?
Well, no, not at all.
Well-
There's a hell of a lot of papers here, and I've been through the lot of them, and there's a few.
Well, we are time limited today, so if you could ask your questions succinctly, it would be appreciated. I think,
Absolutely.
Jerry.
Well, just in terms of the issue which was raised by my colleague here, we've got a tipping point possibly in the garden waste subscriptions. At some point, as the law of diminishing returns, at some point, presumably, people would think, I'm not going to bother paying the extra money now for a Waverley green bin or brown bin. I'm going to go and throw it over the hedge, or I'm going to go and tip it somewhere. And at what point does that come? Are we sure that we're going to get this extra money coming in, and that it's not going to pass the tipping point and end up being burned or tipped or whatever? Is that something we can only tell retrospectively, because we're seeing reports throughout the papers of increased fly tipping all over the place? And do we want to, for the amount of money it brings in, do we want to risk that? I don't know. There's one particular issue, and if you turn page 34, it's a bit of an oddity because I don't know whether it actually applies to us, but it might be me. We're talking about the charges for zoo licences, Mr. Chair.
You're going to open them, then, Joe?
Well, it might be that Waverley might be the place that needs a zoo licence in the borough. I don't know whether we've got any, but if we are changing
Put it in
from... I wasn't thinking that way, Councillor Martin, but if we're changing, I don't know what we've got in front of us. It costs £1,100 for a zoo, and we've got to go through this pretty quickly, but we are going to increase by 33% by doing it 4 yearly instead of 3 yearly, according to this. Am I right? Which I think is actually reducing the cost of a zoo licence by 33%. Are we going to do it 5 yearly instead, or what? So these big numbers stood out. There are various numbers which stand out amongst the increases in charges, and that was one. I have no idea if we've got zoos, but I do think we're putting the price down, not increasing it, is what we're doing there.
Well, the officer like to comment, because I read it exactly the other way around, that we're going from a 4-year licence to a 3-year licence, but never mind.
Yeah. Well, it says 16-17 is a 3-year licence.
Well,
do you want me to comment on that? I don't know the answer. I don't know if Robin does as the...
it looks at Jim knows the answer.
It's fairly accurate.
Excuse me, hang on.
Too many zoos.
Hang on a minute, gentlemen.
Yeah, go on.
Jim, did you know? You said you knew the answer.
Yeah, well, Richard, we have this
Yes.
with Richard anyway. Yeah.
Yes, apparently Busbridge Lakes is now being reclassified as a zoo. It has a suitable number of exotic species.
Okay,
and enough of
that's what it's
those.
all about.
So, yes.
And this is a statutory figure. It's because the government have actually changed the,
Right. So we ain't got any options.
now many options.
Right, hang on.
I still don't know whether the answer is that it's the wrong way round or the right way round, but if the government have decided it's their problem, not ours.
Yeah.
We've got, I think, at page 57, we've still got in there that we've got £1 million stuck aside for potential salmon site acquisitions, and that's going to be in 2019. Presumably, some people know what we're talking about in respect of that, of what sites we're looking at. But the question would have to be, obviously, what we can't really do is go around paying for mitigation if it's not effective. Are we going to have proof? Or are we just going to be able to buy things, call them SANGs, regardless of whether or not there's any evidence that they work? What's the council's... are we going to make sure before we spend that money that actually we're not buying imaginary mitigation? There was a lot in last year's papers. I remember at this stage a year ago we were saying that there was going to be a large sum, it's probably still under pink papers, from the Brightwell scheme coming into this. A lot of that was coming from new homes bonus. We haven't been told in that time how that new homes bonus contribution is now going to be counted, because at the time, a year ago, it was going to go towards paying, filling the hole in the revenue stream. We're now told it's not going to, and that new homes bonus has been reduced. Is that going to come back into these sums? I haven't seen in here where it's been taken into account, if at all, and I'm wondering whether it's an issue that's on side which could bring us in money. Whether it's within that 3-year period, of course, is another matter, but that's what it was looked at a year ago. Has the situation changed in that this year we're not looking at that as being any contribution to the medium-term financial strategy? So that's a question. I think for now, I'll see if there's anything else. But I'll pass on to other people.
Okay. Do you want to comment?
So, a few points there. Joan, £5 tipping point on the garden waste. The head of service feels that the demand is such that there won't be an impact on the take-up from £5. Obviously, we'll need to review that and need to review any further charges, but he doesn't feel at the tipping point yet. Now, that might take us to the tipping point, but it's that's not his view. But by all means, if members have comments, we can pass that through to the executive to consider. Point about the SANG, that £1 million was agreed by the council last year to set aside in the event that an appropriate site for SANG mitigation is identified, and then there will be a full business case put forward to council to spend that. In terms of Brightwells, there's no allowance anywhere in here for any new homes bonus coming from Brightwells, when it does, that will be beyond the 3-year point that we're talking about here, probably anyway, just due to the construction period, because new homes bonus comes on stream about a year after properties are built out and complete for council tax purposes. I think that was it.
Yes.
Can I just ask, in the General Fund budget overview, it says about the improvement plan roles, and I'm sure it's just a bit of a typo, but 2 new roles to carry out actions of the improvement plan, hope to achieve long-term savings. I don't hope. I mean, I hope people that are doing improvements will achieve long-term savings, and I'm sure that you have looked at those long-term savings that they will achieve. I think hopes probably needs to be deleted.
Thank you. Yeah, that's probably.
I'm sure it's just been snapped in there. You know that word.
Yes. Okay.
Just looks a little bit vague.
Yes.
And the other query that I had. And I'm sure this is me being ignorant here. And the business rates pilot and that, where does that money sit within everything? If anywhere.
So we're not budgeting for any benefit from the business rates pilot at the moment. Now, so whilst the government have offered Surrey a business rate pilot, the bid was successful. There's still a memorandum of understanding to agree and enter into. We haven't completed that yet because we've only just received the draft, and all 12 councils will need to sign up to that. But I don't envisage there being a problem there. The reason I don't want to budget for any gain coming from that at this stage is we won't actually know what it is until probably 20 months' time. So you have to get to the end of the year, work out what your actual gain was, and that's not until a few months after that. So it will be the middle of 2019 until we know. But we are confident, because when we put the bid in, we were confident that over the whole of the county there will be sufficient growth in business rate base to ensure that there's no loss and that there is probably going to be a substantial gain from being a pilot. And of course, the other advantage of being a pilot is coming back to the negative grant thing, is we can help influence government policy through that as well, which is a real bonus.
All right. Richard.
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me come back. Could I just ask officers to, either Peter or Graham, to explain how paragraph 31 is going to work in practice? And the reason for asking that question, so that's the increasing council tax premium for long-term empty properties. At what point will that be applied? Because I'm very, very supportive of the notion of using this to stop people speculating on properties and homes as empty. But one of the main reasons why properties are often empty for quite a while is the death of the last surviving partner, and you've got that distressing period of probate, and then trying to sell a property that's not being done up for sale, and that can lead to quite long periods of emptiness through no malicious intent or no speculative intent. So I'm not quite sure how it's applied, but if it was going to be applied in that situation, I wonder, is there an implementation point that would be more sensitive as we apply it?
It's a good point. Probate doesn't count. The clock doesn't tick when probate period is in place, and a property would need to be sort of out of probate and empty for 2 years before the premium kicks in.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, we've already spent nearly an hour on this particular topic, which really is the most important one we need to deal. But one more question, one more query from Liz, then perhaps.
I was just in mid-flow. Does the changes in the the Homelessness Act and that with people, does that come in anywhere? That is somewhere, but.
Chairman, it's flagged as a risk, and it is a general fund cost as opposed to a housing revenue account cost. Businesses, but the head of service actually is we've left it that whilst it's a risk, it's very difficult to quantify at the moment, and so rather than us try to estimate it, put a budget on it, we will need to keep that under close monitoring. Now, it's a really good question, because I think if members are feeling uncomfortable about closing out on the budget without any provision in there for the impact of the Act in Waverley, then we need to pass that comment back. But the head of service is confident that rather than try to put an amount to it at the moment and put it into the budget, we will be able to try and use our track record of containing the cost to for as long as possible. But clearly, if we get a few months into the year and there is a significant additional cost, we will need to come back to members to seek additional funds. Now, whether Chairman, you want to pass that on as an observation?
What do members feel? What comment would they like to pass on? Would they like to pass that comment on to the executive? And consider that some sort of provision should be included in the budget for this particular issue? Is that what's the consensus around the table? Or are you content to allow officers to find some money somewhere during the course of the year, should it become necessary, and if necessary, come back to council for amending the budget accordingly? I would prefer the latter type. Usually, we find a bit of freedom during the course of the year. I think, from my perspective, I'd suggest we alert the executive the concern on this topic. At this stage, don't insist that
I'd agree with that.
And be aware and be prepared to make provision in due course if necessary. Peter, do you want to?
Chairman, we do already have access to some funding. We've got the discretionary housing payment.
We'll have to ask the executive to consider whether they should have a contingency plan.
Okay. Right.
The government have given us actually some new burdens funding as well, but it's only for 2 years, and it might not be sufficient. So by all means, raise it. So we do have something we can draw on.
Okay.
But it's a bit of an
unknown. A very quick one, Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to come back. On the council tax, we are building 300 homes every year, and of course each of them should be paying £1,000 minimum in council tax. So I would have thought the council tax increase should be at least another 300,000 on top of those 270.
So Chairman, Waverley's council tax is 170. Band D is about £170. There's a line further up that table, council tax growth of 40, then another 50, and then another 50, and that is what you're referring to, Councillor Holder. That is net new properties bringing council tax in before we even apply an increase.
Okay.
So okay.
Yeah. I noticed we haven't commented much on the capital expenditure programme. Does anyone want to pick up a comment on the capital programme?
Well, can I ask whether there's going to be a budget book that we can look at, a detailed budget book? I assume it's not available yet.
Not yet.
Chair, there wasn't going to be a detailed budget, but this report shows all of the major changes that need a decision going through from the current year's budget. But there wasn't going to be all of that detail going through the budget process.
No, I recall there wasn't last year. I think the year before there was a budget book available in advance of the council meeting, well in advance of the council meeting. Last year there wasn't, I don't think, but and we were able to go through each of them to see how they added up. And
can I suggest if there's some more detailed questions like that, you talk to the officers direct offline.
It links back to Councillor Seaborn's question, Joe, because Annex 1 is the summary on top of a huge amount of detail. And I think if any members want to delve into that in detail, rather than put another 150 pages to every ONS committee, then I think that that option is there. If members want to dive into a particular line or service in a lot more detail, we can certainly do that before council.
Can I? Well, let's just. We're talking about capital programme now.
Everything quickly. Can we have spreadsheets? Don't want masses of paper.
We're not going to be able to change the format in between now and the budget time. If you've got more questions,
are we able to be issued spreadsheets?
Well, it depends what you want.
Well, that's the spreadsheet there that sits behind the Annex 1.
Yeah.
So
that's what you get. That's available.
Take it up separately.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
Did you want to say more?
Just so what's the time?
Yeah, go on, quick.
Just again, this is a second time I've been on this committee, but the general fund working balance is on page 57. Is 3,200, and it's 3,200 each year. Is that normal, or does it not change with inflation or anything else?
So this is 3 million to every charity.
Sorry, 3 million. Sorry, forgot the 3 noughts.
And that is just an assessment. It's a judgment of what is an appropriate level of balance to hold. It's approximately the quarter of the total net running costs, and so I have to make a judgment about what is an appropriate balance to keep there in case of emergencies and unexpected costs.
Thank you very much.
And incomes, and that's what that is. So it's held at the same level at the moment, but we do review it every year.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
I think just draw members' attention to the fact that our capital programme, we can go back to that, nearly a third of our capital programme, or 30% of our capital programme, relates to disabled facilities grants. I think over which we have got no control whatsoever. So I don't know whether we want to bring that to attention again of the executive, because it's an issue where we have to cough up, but the person actually specifying it belongs to the county council. And we've got no control, as I understand it, over what they recommend. So the assessment is done by the county council employees. So it's an issue which I remember from time as a finance portfolio holder.
The county council give us all the funding. They give us the whole 600,000 of funding.
So you've got that back from the county council?
Yes, so that comes through. But our team, our housing team, administer that based on local needs, but most of the time we do use an occupational therapist from Surrey County Council. But because it's a partnership, it helps right in with adult social care. But the funding does come through from the county council.
I beg your pardon. Okay. Anybody else to go on the comment before we pass on? We've had a full hour on this now. Right. I think we should end by first congratulating the officers and the executive and the portfolio holder for getting to a balanced budget under difficult conditions.
Agreed.
And recognise that the problems are more likely to be in subsequent years rather than in the current budget yet. And if we can pick up some of the comments we've made and pass them forward, particularly where we've been expressing some concern, can we pick those up? Okay, members content with that?
Agreed.
Okay. Let us then move on to the next substantial piece of work, which is the budget strategy working group subgroup options. Peter, again, I'm conscious, we're already at 8 o'clock, but this is another important piece of work which we need to address in some detail. Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll keep it quite succinct today. So this piece of work follows on from the September committee, where you were looking at the medium-term strategy and the issues that we've spent an hour now discussing around the next 3 years challenge to find a significant amount of money. And the budget's also got the built-in strategy of the 3 main savings or income streams for the next 3 years to balance the budget. So the point of the paper is to enable this committee and the other scrutiny committees to focus more strategically on dealing with the longer term issues going forward, rather than delving into the minutiae of the numbers actually behind the budget. So it's about adding more strategic value to where we're heading. So this paper is also following on, it dovetails into the last paper we've just been looking at, the budget for next year. in terms of the savings. The first proposal in the paper is that, which is in the budget paper as well, is to set up a monitoring group within the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to work with officers developing the officers that are developing the savings plans going forward. So we have a reasonable pace and reasonable scrutiny over how these things are shaping up going forward. Because it's a significant amount of money and we need to keep the pressure on. We can't wait until this time next year to see how well we're doing. We need to know every quarter really that we're on the right track. The paper then moves on into looking at how this committee can work more strategically at answering the questions. And Councillor Seaborn brought in the issue. It's not just about looking at costs. It's not as blunt as that. It's looking at lots of different issues. And how do we make sense of them? This is what this paper's trying to help the committee work through. So there's four key themes within the strategy. It's about, first of all, about efficiencies. So efficiencies, it says effectively, it's either doing less or doing less better. So it's a mixture of those. And also it's a more longer term issue of the transformation. So it's doing things differently. But it's also doing different things as far as the authority is concerned. And there's some challenges for all of those issues. So the paper effectively walks through four key themes. It starts out with it's quite a logical flow. It says what do we do and how do we charge for that. So effectively we had a huge discussion at the last session in September about mandatory discretionary and what are these things for each service, what is it? And the paper tries to just walk through what the issues are around mandatory discretionary, and it says things like, so we start with defining what is statutory, and there's no real key definition of what statutory is. It's interpretation of statute in terms of application to how we deliver service. It then goes on to challenging assumptions of definition. So it follows through fairly logically. For discretionary services, if something's discretionary, are we charging for it? Are we cost recovering? We spoke about that a little bit earlier in terms of fees and charges. And if something's statutory, how much of that service should we be delivering as far as statute's concerned? So it's really just opening up that whole question and making sense of it. So the proposal is that members and officers work together through all services and dissect the services so we can understand the minutiae of what's going on in the service. Just don't take a huge service heading and treat it as one. There's lots of things going on in each service. We need to understand statutory, discretionary in that context, because that's where the detail is. So that really works it through. And we get to the end of that bit and it says, okay, so in terms of fees and charges, we've got to relate what we do as an authority to our cost recovery. And we need to recover wherever we can. But we're not in such a simplistic environment. You know, in a political environment, we're here to serve people. So we also need to understand the implications of cost recovery on the clientele of the council. The next section then gets into demand management. So it says, okay, demand management, it focuses on the needs of the user. So effectively, what is the capacity that we need to actually service the needs of the user, and also how can the needs of the user be serviced? So it's opening up some questions there about what these services are that we actually do deliver. It also questions how we can scale back some of the services. So it's about it's about prioritisation, really, as a council. Who effectively asking the question: who's in control of where the council is going? Is it the general public, or are we making more informed decisions about what it is we're going to deliver and how we're going to deliver it? And then how do we manage people's expectations around that once we've made those decisions? Because there will always be people that are disappointed and expect more, and it's about changing the relationship between us and the wider client base of the authority. So underneath that, it's also about the cost drivers that sit there for each service, what's driving the cost of the service. And that comes back to demand management. And then it's about how do we manage that demand once we've defined it. And that's where our efficiency savings come in. It's where the systems thinking type processes come in. It's where the customer service initiatives come in, the channel shift. How do we capture demand further upstream so it's not so costly later on to deal with particular needs. And there are some action points in there around looking at the data and making sense of it. The third key heading there is so it looks at our procurement, effectively the things that we are buying, and it talks about the value chain. So we can spend some good resources getting our procurement right. So we identify we want to buy something, and we buy it well, but we get good value for that. But how do we maintain that value right through to the end of whatever that project is, and to maintain the value chain, to make sure we don't lose the values that we've got through our procurements further on through inefficient or ineffective implementation. It also questions the issue between effectively it's reactive versus planned buying. So in terms of our spend, looking at those issues, we're spending about 14 million a year. How much of that is reactive? How much is it actually planned in terms of service spend? And then it goes on to say we spend well over £1 million a year on the voluntary sector support. It's all good spend, but then that's £1 million a year that we're not necessarily getting the best control of that spend in terms of our own decided priorities. And so how do we work better with the voluntary sectors that we actually fund to deliver better outcomes for the money that it's costing us? It comes into the mix. It's a significant amount of money. Fourth and last part of this is how can the council improve its people resources? Spending upward of £14 million a year on delivering our services, and we're sitting in some very expensive asset here, and we have a certain culture of delivering service from this particular centre here. It's questioning all of those assumptions that's how we do business. So it walks through that, saying, okay, there's some fairly quick wins in terms of the timescales of a year or so, looking at some remuneration issues and how we deal with that. How we move to a more performance-related culture, which enables us to not necessarily all be based here because we have people working remotely through the technology that are available today. And the trust more is about service delivery rather than having somebody here, so we monitor and see what staff are doing. Complete culture change to something that we've done for however many years since we turned the last century, work from set places. It talks about our recruitment issues, how we resolve those, where we're finding the harder to recruit professional areas, and also the admin staff are quite difficult to recruit. Geographically, it's quite an awkward place really for people to commute from a long way away. So it ends, and the last section just ends asking the questions about how we can change our current policies to actually realise some of the assets and take better opportunity from what we've got in terms of the building and the staff at the moment. So there's some quite significant pieces of work to be done there as a working group.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I think this is a helpful paper, and some of it clearly falls, a lot of it clearly falls within the remit of this committee. So that seems to me it goes without saying we should accept the challenge to remain a continuous overview of what is going on, and at each of our meetings have an update to see what progress has been made throughout the year and the execution of the budget. I think the really interesting thing, and it comes on to the proposed subgroup work streams, and it does seem to me Peter set them out in a pretty good order. identifying, the split between statutory and discretionary is a pretty good starting point, I think, for looking at what we do and identifying why we're really doing it. Is it absolutely necessary? And then I think going on from there to demand management, makes a lot of sense, because it follows from one to the other. Once you know what we have to do and what we may not have to do, but we're doing on a discretionary basis, and who's calling the shots? Why are we actually doing some of these discretionary things? Are they just because somebody shouts loudest, or is it because we can identify a real need out in the community? I personally, and I think what other members would like to see introduced another one called service delivery, because I think the corollary, once you identify what you want to do, would like to do, then how you deliver it is a separate issue from demand management. But I mean, other members may wish to comment on that thought. And then when it comes to purchase procurement, I always think procurement is just part of project execution, and we should actually be looking at project execution as a whole, with procurement being a significant part of it. But it seems to me we are at risk of just focusing on procurement without following through for managing the execution downstream, because certainly in my experience that is often the most difficult and most challenging part of the whole thing. But members, those are my views for comment. Nick.
Thank you, Chairman. I talked about this before, maximising the assets we have already. In this building, we let out officers to the police, to the Citizens Advisory Bureau. We let the public use our car park for a fee over weekends. And it just strikes me that we should maximise what assets we have. This room is a perfect room for a boardroom meeting. It's got cameras, it's got screens, it's got everything. When it's not being used by the council, should we not let it out to local businesses for their boardrooms? It seems to be, a no-brainer.
Tom.
Wouldn't there be a security issue?
Sorry, Tom, you put in.
I was
really struck by what you said there, because I was also reflecting on the council chamber.
Yeah.
And I just wonder what appetite there is for looking at that as a more flexible space, as some councils have done.
The bill.
Wouldn't it take any security issues regarding it really coming into the council?
Well, it could be, but I tend to agree with Nick. Nothing should be off the table. If we're going to have a radical look at what we might or might not do, then opportunities for maximum return what assets we've got clearly is one of them. I think it fits into this concept of having task groups following the thing through. Peter.
This is a really, really big piece of work. This is
monstrous.
It really is. I mean, we're trying to sort of take an entirely different view of the council. I think it's a good thing to do. That members and officers working together, I think, could be quite helpful. I'm just interested to know, Chairman, how is the intent to sort of go through section, department by department? Do we take one particular area and then literally go department by department, following through processes and how they do things, and the degree to which it's statutory, non-statutory, the degree to where the service provisions are, and so on and so forth. I'm struggling to see how we go about starting from scratch, because you've got to narrow it down to a particular. Is the intent to sort of go area, department by department, section by section, or where do you start? I guess I'm trying to get to.
I think it's a good question, but I think there will have to be limits as to how far and how deep you go.
Well, yes, no, I can't disagree with the intent of doing it. So the theory of it is something I'm happy with. But it's just the practice of it. How are we going to do this? Because it seems to me a tremendous amount to attempt to do.
Well, it does indeed. From my perspective, Peter, do you want to comment?
Sure, Chairman. To just start off with the statutory discretion, we can ask the heads of service to work with their individual service managers to fill in a template that populates the information that we need to get that detail together, which will enable the committee then to look at it and make sense of the bigger picture around the services.
Yeah, but it would just seem to me that if we were to take a section at a time and say, okay, apply these principles to what we're looking at, but the end result is, are we delivering value for money from each of these areas? And is there a better way of doing it by dropping that non-statutory requirement? Or could we set a different service level? But I'm struggling to see how you can't. The only way I think you can effectively do it is a sort of departmentally. I'm not quite sure how we go about that.
My concept was that the starting point was finding out what we're doing now. In terms of statutory and discretionary, because without really understanding what we do now and which service is discretionary, which service is statutory, I don't think you can move on to the next stage. And that's why I felt the concept of demand management would be helpful. And I think we may have to look at going out with consultants to get a more clear understanding of what our customers actually want from us on a discretionary basis. And I recall we actually did this some years ago. I forget the name of it now, but I mean, we did find some quite interesting results, rather than actually just depending on councillors shouting for their own particular patches. What are the result of the survey showed there was some quite different priorities out there, which we weren't necessarily addressing at the time. Now, it seems to me we need to find a way of establishing on a more reliable basis what our customers actually are looking from us, and then we can relate to our statutory discretionary services, and that may take us to look in more detail in particular areas. But it seems to me you have to do it on a fairly general basis to start off with before we can hone down into the very specifics of individual departments.
There's a really strong link with this report and the previous budget report, because some of those targets we were looking at are going to be looked at as part of the exercise in this subgroup. But actually, when you break down a bit like this budget book does, everything that we do, you can fairly easily prioritise and strip out those that either members don't want to look at, or they're not going to generate big returns, and you can get down to a handful of services. And I think this working group will be able to fairly quickly do that, actually. So with the templates, I think we'll get there. And as you said, Chairman, there was a growth bid, a one-off growth bid in the budget detail to undertake some kind of community engagement process on the budget priorities, which we did do a few years ago and was very valuable. So I think all of that together will really help us to focus on the areas that members want to start with on this, rather than just take every department, because I think that's quite a big piece of work that is.
Anyone else want to comment? Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to reiterate what I said before, that this paper, I think it's excellent. There's some really good stuff in there. I think the looking for income is implicit rather than explicit, and it's not a dirty word. It's something we've got to do. It'd be quite nice to give it a little more thought and see if we can tease out some specific bits of each of these threads that are targeting boosting what comes in rather than reducing what goes out. Because you can only reduce what goes out for so far, and then you can't do your business. So that's point one. The other one is I'd like to support Councillor Van's comment about project management. I've got it written down here that in the list on page 62 there's actually nothing about project management in there. And we've seen that getting timelines for projects, and then where there are timelines for projects, actually timelines that get adhered to as well, something of a rarity or a struggle. And the project management skills, it's in the skills exercise, but I think the procurement aspect is very much part of that. In fact, there's a danger of focusing too much on the cost aspect of procurement. We've got this great danger of ending up with Carillion as your provider. And I know that's not the intent, but it's a risk. So seeing procurement as an integral part of things rather than an end in itself, I think might be good. So I'm supportive of mine.
I think I'm just reiterating actually what Councillor Seaborne's just said, in that this is a really good document, and it's something that is going to be a very big project, but I'm sure very, very worthwhile. But the opportunities for local government as well, you know, not just cutting back and paring back, but also looking for opportunities. You know, there's lots of stuff now around data protection and being a data controller, and there may be opportunities for the council to look at that and offer data control to parish councils, town councils, whatever, I'm not sure. You know, but there are some opportunities around, I'm sure, that could be looked at, and I think, you know, maybe there should be somewhere where, even if we think of a really madcap idea, that we can just email it to someone and just say, have you thought of this? You know, so...
Jerry.
Thanks. I do want us to move on, because I don't know exactly what we're being asked to do tonight. There's quite a lot of under 3 and 4 the recommendations 3 and 4 on page 67 as to agreeing subgroups and whatever. I do just want to step backwards to the beginning of I'm looking at like things that we're told, the information we're being given in here, and beginning of section 4, at the bottom of page 66, tells us that we're significantly above the HMRC rate in mileage rate allowances. And I did notice in the press that there was some talk of us having 2 separate rates, one for councillors, one for staff, and the staff were getting a higher 65 pence rate or something like that. Well, I don't think we've ever had an answer to that. I don't know whether it's ever been asked, but actually in a meeting. If we're looking for savings and we're paying well over the HMRC rate, someone should ask the question of, are we, and what's it about, and is there any room for moving that without everybody hating us for mentioning it? And we've got a similar...
I'm not going to hate you for mentioning it, because we've mentioned it.
Yeah, that's not the way it works here.
I don't see why not.
Yeah, better gloss over that. And at the top of page 67.
It's clearly mentioned. Very clearly mentioned.
It doesn't tell us any numbers, so you have to ask. At the top of page 67, we're getting into a whole new kettle of fish of time and motion studies. And I mean, it's work which I think can really benefit this council, and it's the direction I think we've got to go into, but it's going to be very, very difficult to do, because if people are doing their work from home, how many hours are they putting in? Are we going to end up paying for piecework, and can that work within the system that we've got? Because it could be just, will people call it value for money if the only thing what the member of staff does in one day could have been done in 5 minutes, but it took them a whole day of research that people don't appreciate, and they're being charged hundreds and hundreds of pounds for, we're paying the staff hundreds and hundreds of pounds for what looks like 5 minutes work. Are we going down, that line of piecework, and can we get that through the joint negotiating committee? So, there's going to be a lot of difficulties involved in the changes that are coming over the years, but it started already, hasn't it, with people working from home? But Chairman, can we move on to the recommendations and get an answer to 60?
I was about to take you there.
I'd like to stick to the question of the
the first thing we need to agree amongst ourselves. I mean, accepting that this is an initial paper, are we content with the basic concepts were set out here of these the subgroup work packages? I mean, are they the ones we think we should be following? So can we agree that for a start? With the proviso, I think there should be a service delivery package in there. But whatever anyone else's comment, because I think service delivery is one of the key issues we need to look at.
Chairman, I mean, you've used the terminology there, subgroup work packages. I think that's helpful, because the recommendations do talk about a number of working groups being set up, and as you know, at the Scrutiny Coordinating Board, there was a discussion around how many working groups the scrutiny committees overall can sustain while still working efficiently. So I think it is helpful to separate out the question of whether or not these are the right topics for scrutiny to be looking at, from the question of, and how do we go ahead and do that?
Well, that's what I was trying to do first. Let's agree the topics are the right topics, and we'll then work our way into how we actually do it and over what sort of timescale, because there is, as everybody is saying, potentially a huge amount of work here. But the problem is, if we are actually going to develop an updated overall strategy, a lot of this work needs to be done. And it needs to be done in conjunction with members and officers together. So I think I like the concept of work. But can we first agree that the topics, with my proviso, are the ones we actually want to work with?
Yeah.
Okay, let's agree that then, and let's then move on to the next set of recommendations. We agree in principle that this is the ONS committee which should be leading class groups.
Agreed.
And then we should be seeking input and cooperation from others into forming the individual subgroups to deal with the individual bits and pieces. Now, what views have we got on timing? Which we can't launch them all together. That is absolutely clear. There aren't enough people around the table and enough hours in the day to do all that. But do we want to set a priority? Which ones we want to launch first and make that and sort of prioritise that? Or do we want to wait for officers to come back to us and sort of advise us which ones they think we should take in which sort of order?
We can certainly do the latter, Chairman, if you want, and we can attach some form of criteria for how we prioritise.
I think some guidance is...
I think we need some guidance, so we'll be here for another 2 hours trying to discuss priorities. Otherwise, I think we would. So are you happy to do that? I think it's a very worthwhile report, which I think we should actually record. And thank you, Peter, for completing that.
Sorry, just one final quick thing. What's the time scale for this? When is this going on forever and ever now, or is there?
From my perspective, this has got to be. The outcomes of these work groups have got to input into next year's budget.
So it's over the course of the next year.
That would be my suggestion.
That was my presumption, but I just wanted to be sure of that.
Or is it the next few weeks?
Well, next year's budget, the 1920 budget.
This is for the budget a year hence. We're not going to be able to influence this year's budget.
No.
This vote, Chairman, is about those unidentified amounts of targets that the holder referred to on the annex. And so we have 12 months to turn this into some deliverables.
So we're looking for outcomes coming from these work subgroups before the start of the budget set-up process.
The groups have to be formed?
Well, they have to be formed indeed. So that is that.
We're looking for willing volunteers.
We're looking for willing volunteers. Do we want to take that now, or do we actually, once the officers have come with the priorities, at our next meeting to actually set these up once we know what's going on?
I would recommend that let the priorities come back and then we bring
that to my mind is sensible. We'll actually set the actual the victims once we know what priorities are.
Let the ball roll. Let's see.
There might be different skill sets or experiences that individual members might. So I can add.
And I think what I would ask in the intervening period, members think which ones they would actually like to work on, because we are going to have to make maximum use of everybody around this table. So if we can identify 2 out of the 4 or 5 you at least you would like to sit on, that would be helpful before we get into the next meeting. Yes, Nabil.
Could I ask for, when you're doing the departments, could you subdivide it and put in different parts of every point that it is subdivided, and anyone wants to go a particular part of that subdivision and mix and match with others?
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Like this is like one of the points which says progressing in budget strategy. So there will be budgets for incoming and outcoming. So some of them want to do separated, subdivided.
Okay. Well, I mean, we've got the 4 or 5 subgroups now identified, which we've agreed. I think within those we need the bullet points from the officers.
Subdividing it.
Yeah, as to the key topics which those subgroups are going to be expected to undertake.
Chairman, I'm looking at recommendation 2, which says that this committee will consult with other ONS committees to agree the memberships, and I assume that would normally mean that you would put this to our next meeting, the coordinating board, and then we would come back to all 4 committees in March, presumably. This is the sort of timescale to be to asking who is at those meetings, who's going to join in. Do we want to do it quicker than that, or is that okay?
That's okay. As far as we're not going to move any further than that, because people will be away and all the rest of it. I think if we get the principle accepted out of here into the coordinating board, which is only next week, and then inviting people from the other ONSs to actually identify who's going to serve on them. And if we could have for next week the priorities and the bullet points for each one, that would be very handy to take to the coordinating committee, if that's possible. Right, okay.
And does that mean the recommendations 3 or 4 are effectively going to be put off until the March meeting?
Indeed, that's what we've just done.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think allocating the work and task and finish groups again has to be put off to the next one. So I think we're through those recommendations. Sorry, Richard.
That's okay. Thanks, Jim. Depending on what colleagues think, I think it might be a good idea if when officers are putting together these more detailed sort of bullet points for us, if you could actually list the skills that would be beneficial for members to have, so we don't get people who get really excited about an idea but have nothing to no experience.
That's what I was saying. The subdivision. That's what I.
Might be the ideal candidate. You never know.
That's what I.
Okay.
The subdivision will explain it to me.
Jerry, quickly.
What was the answer to the question in relation to our mileage rates?
Chairman,
Well, we don't know.
I've written out an answer for Councillor
Okay,
Hyman.
thank you. Thank you. Right.
You
Okay.
join us every day.
Okay. Does that you?
Agreed.
So you content with what the task you've been given now? Okay. Thank you. Let's move on then, because again it's gone 8:30. So if we can move on to a quick overview of what has been going on elsewhere. Nick, do you want to just give a 5-minute talk as to where we got on the property investment?
Well, Chairman, I have written out a huge dissertation, assuming that I'd have about a quarter an hour to explain it all, but I read that you want a brief summary, so I thought I'd hand it
How kind.
back to you.
Okay. Well, for others will be aware that we have a subgroup working looking at investment strategy. It started off by being commissioned to look at property investment to a property company, but rapidly came to the conclusion that the starting point really was to address the investment strategy per se, and that's got itself renamed to that effect. We've had 3 meetings to date. We're fairly well through an initial draft document following the headings from the GVA presentation. So the concept, and Anne's team has been working hard on this, together with members of the work group, to identify and pull together bits and pieces of strategy which have been discussed and agreed in the past, but to actually address them in the context of those headings. So there's a coherent and visible strategy. We have a bit more work to do in some areas, and that will take probably at least maybe 2 more meetings to get to that. But the hope would be we could get to bring the draft report, to the March version of this meeting. So that is the current intention. But I think, having talked to the leader, the emphasis is getting it right first time rather than bringing it too early. So the target is to get it to March, and that's what we're working to at the moment. So that's where we are on that particular work group. The other work group is one which I chair on capital expenditure. We've had a series of meetings today. Jasmine, can you remind me how many meetings we had? It's 3, that's what I thought, and 1 more to come. We've been through principally the general fund capital expenditure areas and the slippages. We've seen some interesting things which have reflected in some of the comments we've made earlier on today. Contingencies, slippage. We have seen programmes which have gone into a budget ostensibly for the year, which are really, realistically, multi-year budgets. Now, I think the new accounting system has changed that, and there's a greater degree of confidence that what comes forward now actually is the budget for the year. But still, we have got concerns, I think, about resource planning. I mean, it seems to us still to be pretty hit and miss by and large, and we're not convinced yet that resource planning in terms of time-based resource planning, Gantt charts and that sort of thing, are common currency in our capital expenditure programmes. So I think there's more work for us to do, and we will produce again a report, hopefully for the March ONS, setting out our findings at large. Is there anything else we need to sort of pick up on that, Richard?
I think
So they are working, and they're actually producing some good stuff. Our next meeting actually is to look at the housing capital programmes, and then we'll have covered a fair coverage of what has been going on. So that's very briefly where we are on those. So we can move quickly on to the next agenda item, which is the universal credit update. Peter, Yasmin?
So this is something that has come from the October Value for Money Customer Service Committee that you requested. So it's just an update on what the Council has been doing to mitigate the anticipated challenges of the implementation of universal credit. You'll notice that it mostly focuses on mitigation surrounding housing, and this mainly because a lot of the risks are around that and sort of rent arrears and things like that. I have spoken to the rents officer today just to stay updated on the sort of the progress of these mitigations, and I'm confident that they're still accurate and they're continuing to be implemented. But I don't know if Peter's got anything further you want to say about
just a quick summary of what the work that Yasmin has put in the report for him. So the key things in terms of mitigation across the borough at the moment really are that just around the housing stock and the housing tenants, there's £1 million going into a contingency for next year in HRA, which will help any impact of universal credit. Just reiterate that the welfare officer is in place, and the point of the welfare officer, which sits within general fund housing, is to assist the residents of the borough as universal credit rolls out. So it's assisting with IT access and also the application process, and also budgeting is a big part of universal credit, and they have, every claimant has to go through a budgeting process in order to claim universal credit, and they'll get assistance for that. And the rent team, we've heard as well in the report, the rent team has quite a big strategy there at the moment to look at the more vulnerable tenants and making sure they're being supported as we roll through. But there is context as well, that we've got 3,000 benefit claimants at the moment of working age that qualify for universal credit under the current rules. We go to the full rollout of universal credit in July, which means that it's all new claimants as of July go on to universal credit. The existing people will stay on housing benefit until such point in the future they come off, and that can be many years hence. And only at the point they come back onto benefit will they go onto universal credit. We have a turnover of about 500 a year in terms of the working age people. So just within our own client base at the moment, it will take 6 years effectively to get to the point where all people are on universal credit within the borough. If they all literally did turn over, literally 500 a year. So there's a long-term mitigation here. It's not going to be a sudden storm come July. There's a lot of time for us to work with people across the borough.
Okay, thank you. Anyone want to comment? Richard?
Well, it goes back to the theme of contingent budget. Are there any plans to manage that £1 million should we have got it wildly wrong and that universal credit works a lot better than we were expecting it to? Because presumably there'll be so many cases coming in per quarter, so we'll know after each quarter how we're doing.
So, Chairman, the £1 million is there as to mitigate an impact of universal credit, but it's also there to mitigate the impact of a couple of the other government initiatives that didn't actually come to fruition during this year, but are still on their agenda, such as the disposal of high-value property, where we'd have to, the government potentially still going to go down the road of forcing us to sell property over a certain value, and the proceeds, the capital proceeds of that would go to DCLG, who will use it to fund the right to buys in housing associations. So it's the $1 million isn't just for the universal credit. And the business plan's looked at every year, and that $1 million would be adjusted according to where we see the risk setting.
The way the report's written, it does infer that £1 million is specifically. So I think the weasel word in there might be appropriate to see it's a more general contingency. But it would seem to me you probably need a year or two's experience before you can really say what you're going to require from extra funding. I've just got one comment. I mean, it seems to me, in terms of encouraging people to budget and have bank accounts, the issue of credit union should appear on the scene.
Yeah.
And it does seem to me that we have supported Boom, which was the previous incarnation, was Surrey Save, which we were very active on at one stage. I don't know where we have still got a relationship with the joint, the merger with the Sussex Kent credit union called Boom. But it does seem to me an opportunity to promote that in this environment.
It is, Chairman. I met with them on Friday, actually, with the other directors. They came and presented to us, and Universal Credit's very much on their minds, and they were keen to learn from us about potential impact. So we have got an open dialogue with Boom.
Well, it does seem to me it's probably worth putting in a report at some stage.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Liz.
Can I just ask? I believe that the delay in payment before people get universal credit that has been reduced down slightly, hasn't it? It was 6 weeks or something, and now it's gone down. Is it gone down a week?
It was 7 days, and they planning to remove that.
Oh, it's 7 days. So has that had any impact on a positive impact on the amount that we've?
Well, it hasn't had any impact on us here at the moment, because we've only got something like 15 claimants.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, we're happy to note that report.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Are we happy to note
we
that?
did this debate this very well at the last meeting. We don't need to repeat that debate.
And I think it would be useful that we have a regular brief update as to how this is progressing in practice. Right, on to the next, which is benefit service improvement. Peter?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll keep it brief. So the benefit service went through a systems thinking, which is a lean thinking methodology of looking at redesigning the service. So the point of the redesign is to design the service around the customer's needs rather than the services needs. We covered a lot of this detail last time. So the key thing is the assessment's done at the point of contact with the client. As soon as we get notification of a claim, we get in touch with the client and we talk to them about what their needs are and the paperwork they will need, and they will get a draft assessment at that point, so they'll get a good idea of just how much they will be entitled to. So each contact with the client is owned by a member of staff, so it's not going out as generic mail to them, or they're just ringing a number that they know to talk to. The point is they know who they're going to speak to in the service to resolve their claim for them. So the key thing is within the trials, while we were designing the service, new claims were being processed in about 20 days. We know from the trials that from the point of first contact to actual payment of the claim, we can get it down to 7, and that's just within the trial. Obviously, going through rollout, and within the first year, we're looking at improving efficiencies through a learning process, so it's iterative, and we have the ambition of actually reducing the 7 down to as minimum as possible. So we've been through the redeployment process, we've restructured the team, gone through the employment process, people have been appointed into new roles. They effectively will all be enrolled the existing staff are all enrolled now. We're about to go to advert for 2 technical roles and an internal advert for an assessor that's currently potentially within the authority at the moment. So we'll see how that goes. So the rollout starts literally in March, and we intend to have it, well in fact it starts mid-February actually, to be really accurate about it. And the full rollout across all the team will be done by the end of March, and then it'll be about, it doesn't take long to roll the process into the individual to teach them how to work in the new methodology. So the service will be functioning fully in its new redesigned format from the end of March onwards.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody want to make a particular comment? I suggest we keep a watching brief and come back to us with regular verbal updates as to how it's running through. Moving on then to the complaints handling policy. So, Louise?
Yep.
I wonder if I might just give a bit of an introduction and pass on. So, happily, complaints are quite a small proportion of our customer interactions, but actually they're quite an important thing, because in one way or another they tell us that something has gone wrong, and just as humans we tend to learn most from when things don't go well. So complaints are quite important to us. At the same time, since my arrival and having dealt with a few complaints since being here, and typically the sorts of complaints that I see are the ones that have really gone wrong, it struck me very much that our policy and our procedure could be streamlined and made easier, more accessible, more straightforward. And so Sue Petzold and Louise Norrie have done an excellent job at doing that, making the policy more concise and succinct, and hopefully helping us set the tone for how we should be dealing with some of these difficult interactions as they arise. And then looking at the procedure, certainly we've had 3 formal levels, and what the procedure does is now streamline that to 2, and thereby hopefully save the customer quite a bit of irritation, because at the moment they have an initial interaction with us. If they're unhappy with that, they may complain. If they're unhappy with that, they do it again. If they're unhappy with that, they come back again. All of which can take about 40 working days, so 2 months, during which they're often just told no. And sometimes told yes along the way, but actually looking at the data that we've got and my experience of it is that typically there isn't a great deal of difference between level 2 and level 3. So there's an additional 3 weeks potentially of customers waiting around to be told no again. And that gives rise to quite a considerable amount of frustration. So as well as streamlining that process, and also at the same time, by the way, bringing it in line to where our neighbours are, what we also want to do is put a great deal of more investment into the training and support, so that at level 2 we do genuinely give an objective response. That we're raising, as I say, raising the tone of how we're dealing with complaints, that we're building in more empathy, seeing things better from the customer's point of view at an earlier stage. So that's the intention of making the policy clearer and the procedure more streamlined. And then the other part that I think is really quite important is around the data that I see and that you see. So elsewhere in these reports, you often see reports about complaints, just as you do today, around timeframes. And actually for me, the most important thing over the years, and many years of dealing with complaints in different organisations, in different sectors actually as well, time frame isn't the most important thing. It's really about outcome, it's really about how people felt along the way, it's really about fairness, and it's about those other things as well. So as we're looking at our service plans and looking at our performance management in the coming year and making some changes to these things, what I'd like to see on a quarterly basis when we have our regular review of performance is a different approach to how we're reporting on complaints, with a view to seeing what we're learning from it. Not just about whether we're sending off a letter or a reply in a given moment of time, because actually some things can often be dealt with sooner through a conversation. And that's what I've been doing with some of the complaints that have come up to level 3. I've been picking up the phone and talking to people and actually taking it outside the process. And then other things actually may take a little bit longer. So the statistical information around time frame doesn't really give us the full picture. So that's what I wanted to say by introduction, but colleagues have done the lion's share of the work, so if they want to add anything to that, then I'm going to invite them to do so, and obviously we're all here to be able to answer any points that you may have.
Thank you.
Not really very much to add, other than to say that we will be looking hard, as Tom said, to ensure that there is an objective review at level 2, which will now be the final stage of the complaints procedure, and we're hoping to achieve that. But I will be working with the heads of service on looking at complaints at level 2, so there is a sort of an element of external review, which I think is important. And we think we can have a relatively short transition from the current procedure to the new procedure. The aim is to have the new procedure in place by no later than the 31st of March. So obviously there will be people going through the system who will still have expectations of receiving going to level 3, but we should be able to move to the new process very quickly.
Thank you. Anyone want to comment? Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. Just based on experience and looking at the new procedure, it's probably implicit, but there's nothing explicitly about what happens when someone rings in with a problem to the person who's the cause of the problem. In other words, guaranteed impartiality. I don't know whether you take care of that by overviewing this, but that's frequently when councillors get the irritated phone call. I've called in, I've tried to get something done, nothing's happening. Can you help? And that could possibly be avoided if there's a mechanism to ensure that the first point of contact is not the cause of the problem.
Yes, well, I think one's got to address that through staff training. I mean, most of the complaints that we log, by and large, come in a written form. People who are ringing up to ask for a service or complain about a misbin, that's recorded separately. And we should be aiming to deal with those requests and expressions of concern quickly and effectively. We start logging complaints going through the complaints procedure after there's been a failure to deliver at the first port of call, but we should be working towards satisfying people when they first contact the organisation, and that's something that has to be addressed across the organisation. We've received,
I was saying, I think it's largely a matter of education. What I try and encourage with my residents is, if they have a complaint, they either come straight to me or they go to the parish council and the parish council comes to me. And then I sort it out with the officers concerned. I think we must discourage residents ringing this council direct. I mean, that's what we're here to do as ward councillors, is to deal with problems with our residents. And I think perhaps an article in one of the newsletters that goes out twice a week to explain the complaints procedure, I think would be helpful.
I think that's very true. So often you find out as a ward councillor when there's been a raging argument going on for yonks, and actually by speaking to the appropriate person, you solve it in about 5 minutes flat. And it was a shame that your tenants or residents didn't actually get hold of you in the first place, because you could probably have helped them, pointing them in the right direction, and got a much more satisfactory response from both sides, not just from our side but also from the opposite, because very often they misunderstood what the whole problem was. So I think that's a good point. I've got one further comment, and I'm supportive of what's been trying to be done here, and to simplify and speed up the process. But I've always come from a perspective, and I'm sure it's still here, that the buck stops with the chief executive, and there's a problem. And the chief executive's role is not actually written into this procedure any longer. It seems to have disappeared from it. And somehow or other, I'm sure that's not the intention, as we talked briefly earlier on this evening, there is a loop where you actively are engaged in what is going on, and I think it needs to be in the procedure somehow, just for members' comfort, that you, via the internal process, you will be made aware of what is going on and will be able to act on and take appropriate action. Now, it's not part of the external procedure, I accept, but I think from the internal procedure, I think we need to make darn sure that people do. There is a reporting mechanism where these issues do get reported to the most senior management, so you're able to see and maybe make policy changes to address them as appropriate.
And that's part of being a learning organisation. It's about understanding where performance is, picking up the trends and the learning. And I think there's possibly some scope in there, and we can have a look at the wording in terms of the role of the chief executive and indeed the directors in having that oversight of the performance.
I'd just like to see that in there. Peter.
I have the same comment. The two things. Where was the corporate complaints officer involved in the previous process? And secondly, bearing in mind the lack of the chief executive involvement, then we're perfectly happy to go straight from what really was level 2 straight to the ombudsman. With never a stop at the chief executive. I'm happy to accept that if you want to go with that, but that seems to be a little bit surprising.
Yes, well, my role at the moment is investigating level 3 complaints, so that would be working.
So you just shift down to level 2 complaints now, which increases your workload somewhat.
Somewhat, but not hugely.
And there's a point about driving the standards in the right direction. So that's partly what Sue's role also does.
But it's your report, he's becoming more accountable, I guess, in that sense, if they go straight from...
Well, I think so. So there's an important message, really, I suppose, also said internally in the organisation, is that in terms of operational delivery, it is essentially the head of services role to be responsible for their services.
And should not have you in a backstop.
No, not really. And just, and at paragraph 7, referencing our neighbours, and certainly the experience I've had of moving many years ago now from a 3-stage to a 2-stage process. For example, at East Hampshire, we also haven't, which is not on this because it's not a neighbour, but they both moved at the same time. Actually, both of those councils, as well as Waverley, have excellent reports from the Ombudsman in terms of the results. So I don't really see that risk of somehow taking the chief executive out of the formal process. I don't think it adds to. I don't think that's a risk of diminishing quality. That's not what I've seen, and it's clearly not what most of our neighbours, with one exception, have seen as well.
I'm very happy, Chairman. If that's a judgment and the others are doing it, I think that seems positive.
As long as the loop, the internal loop, is visible, I think that's the important thing from members' concerned. Liz, can we go on quickly?
Just a very quick question, and just as a matter of interest, really. Do you have an IT application which deals with all the complaints?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Jerry?
I just thought that whether we had any figures on the number of complaints we get about the complaints procedure. Because, well, I mean, it's got a long history, really, of a reputation, and I'm sure it's the same with most councils, that it's pointless complaining to the council about the council. And the Ombudsman's got no teeth, therefore it's pointless complaining. This does tie in with what's coming too soon.
It doesn't stop them.
No, but it does limit the amount that we get in reality compared to how many we might otherwise get. Page 127, we're going to come to the KPI. In a bit, it's the only red we've got against us here, and it's under the complaints issue, but it's not mentioned in this this item. So just to note that, whether we talk about that now or whether we leave that until later, Chairman.
Well, we'll leave it until later, I think.
Chairman, could I just respond? I mean, Councillor Hamilton made a point about there's no point in complaining to the council. I have to say that in Sue's role over the years, she's done an exemplary job in being that objective observer. So, you know, at whatever level now, it's going to be level 2, she does a phenomenal role in coming into all the service areas and questioning and being, you know, on the, you know, making sure that the complainant, whether they've got a good point or whatever, and does a good job. So and has you know, it means that we've never had an ombudsman decision on us.
Yeah, I would endorse that from my past experience as Deputy Leader. I mean, she has done a fantastic job, and I'm sure will continue to do so. Okay, are we happy to note that with the comments we made? Agreed. All right, and we move on then to service plans. Now, I took a sort of decision that we would never get to service plans in time to do them justice this evening. You've got five heads of service to present. So what I have proposed is that we seek a meeting with other ONS committees dealing with the general fund service plans and seek a separate meeting to jointly review the service plans in one go outside the timetable of the budget ONS meetings. Yeah. We always have this problem. Every time we get to a budget ONS, people rightly focus on the actual budget numbers and things and never do justice to the service plans. And they're an important aspect which have never really got treated in the past ONS meetings as well as I would like to see. So my proposal, if you agree, is we go through the coordinating group to the ONSs and ask the officers to set up a specific meeting to deal with the service plans offline from the regular ONS meetings.
I was hoping you'd say that.
Sorry?
Yeah. I was hoping someone would say that.
Right. Okay.
Chairman, if you would excuse me, my brother ringing you from Ireland.
Okay.
Chairman, just to clarify that if we go with that approach, which we certainly can do, it just means it will impact on the timetable. Not in a desperate way, I don't think, but obviously the current timetable would see these service plans going through to the executive. You wouldn't want them to do that before ONS had a look, so that timetable would shift somewhat, and clearly you wouldn't want it to shift too far forward because these are the service plans for the next financial year.
But my view is they ought to be done properly, or we really aren't doing justice to the work the officers are putting into it. I think that would be a shame.
Doesn't just enable us to do our job properly, it is more respectful to those who produce the plans.
But exactly right. Exactly right. Exactly right. Which is why I made that suggestion. I'm glad to be explained. Anybody else want to comment on that?
should be soon as possible.
Well, as soon as practically possible.
So it becomes a part of the project.
All right.
Is it going to take long to do them? I mean, I'd rather carry on doing them.
Well,
not put them off.
Well, I have specifically not invited the heads of service to present them because I thought we were going to get exactly this position, get to 9 o'clock, and there's more than an hour's business in my view to deal with this lot properly. You know, even if 5 heads of service have 10 minutes each presenting their service plans, you know, we're the best part of an hour with comments there and then. So I just don't think it's practical.
If they're not here, Chairman, they're not going to do it, are they?
Well, we took that executive decision some while ago.
I support your judgment, Chairman.
Right, thank you. Okay, so we'll agree to move on. Then the next thing is, where are we? Performance.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, try to keep your right to last. But best for
very
last.
Interesting.
Best for last.
The discussion.
Nora.
This evening I will be presenting the quarterly report on the key performance indicators for the second quarter of 2017 and 18. And I would also like to outline the recommendations, the recommended changes to the future performance reporting. The details of the report can be found under the item 13 on the page 119 of the agenda. As agreed at the June 2017 meeting, going forward, the performance indicators presented to the committee will be only on exception basis, concentrating only on those KPIs where performance is above or below the targets by more than 5%, or whether those indicators without target have any notable changes to them. The graphic trend analysis report is set out at Annex 1 on page 123. The second quarter has seen a very good performance with only one indicator being off target by more than 5%, and this indicator, as Councillor Hammond rightly spotted before, is the overall complaints response rate, which has dropped to 81% against the target of 95%. And this is due to a handful of particularly complex level 3 cases which took longer to resolve. It is also worth noting that the overall number of complaints has fallen, with 54 fewer complaints received in the second quarter and only 12 of the complaints being escalated to level 3. The proposal to review the current complaints handling policy, which was just presented, will affect the current set of the indicators, and the table at the bottom of page 120 outlines the proposed changes to the complaints indicators, which will be applied from the 1st of April if the revised policy is approved and adopted. So from the current set of 3 indicators, 2 of them would be made discontinued. However, in their place, it is proposed to introduce 3 new indicators which would allow much more granular response rate analysis for each level. Moving on to the update on the customer service, the officers continue with the review of the current review and are still investigating ways in which we could measure the customer satisfaction levels in the future. As I was advised by head of our customer service and corporate services, this project will be presented to this committee in the next cycle in March this year. It is recommended that the committee firstly considers the performance figures for the second quarter and agrees any observations and recommendations about performance and progress towards targets it wishes to make to the executive. And secondly, recommends that the changes highlighted in the report to the complaints indicators are approved by the executive on adopting the new complaints handling policy. That's all from me.
Okay, thank you. Comments from anybody? Well, I think firstly, I'd like to thank you for actually doing it on the basis we talked about last time, bringing the exceptions to us, and also then for proposing the changes which go hand in hand with the previous item, the complaints procedure. Are we content to let that go forward? Peter?
Chairman, yes, I think is the answer. The only thing which occurs to me is, why are we looking at data which is Q2, which was last September. Why can't we be looking at Q3 data? Why does it take so long to get us the data?
Can I answer that? Sorry, Chairman. Yes. Traditionally, the January cycle of committees has not been able to deal with that quarter because the data is finishing in December, and then we don't have enough time for the officers to prepare it in time to get it into your timetable. So apologies, it's just an awkward quarter. It just doesn't match very well.
Would have it's the Christmas and New Year and all the rest of it gets in the way, doesn't it?
It's the end of the quarter in December, Christmas holidays, everything else. The timetable, the lead-in time to this committee.
Yeah, you've got to publish it a week or two before, so it's physically not possible.
It's just very, very difficult. And there is always one cycle that didn't get a report, and it's always been the January one. We have asked, actually we've asked Democratic Services to look at the cycles of the ONS just to see whether we can do anything about it.
You might want to think about cutting it off before the end of December.
What's a suggestion? The 24th of December, then you can spend the week between Christmas and New Year for sorting that.
I think you're going to get too many complaints in the week after Christmas, that's all I think.
We can look at that and see whether there's any way.
They will then be opened in the new year, wouldn't they?
They'll be pretty quarters.
I mean, in the same vein, how much extra time would you need to get the third quarter stuff out? Because we've just agreed to defer the service work plans to a joint meeting, and I just wonder if if it's just a question of an extra week or so to tidy this up. Could this exercise be done as a joint exercise with current data? Because it's scarcely performance management if your performance behind the curve.
I think it's things to thought for the future as to how we actually make sure we get up-to-date data for the OS meeting. I suggest we leave it at that and let them come forward with proposals for making, maybe slightly adjusting the cut-off dates or whatever alternative they propose to get it to us.
I think we wouldn't be looking at financial data this late in terms of performance management data. 4 months late is not.
Good point. Okay. Anything else on that? Otherwise we can note that. We come on then to the last item, which is really the work programme. As far as the A section is concerned, we've pretty well done most of that. I don't think there are too many changes. The changes are going to come about by what comes forward from the work groups.
Yes, yeah.
So until we have that through, I don't think Jasmine can sensibly feed it into the programme.
No, as you can see, we've got a firm, at the beginnings of a March meeting already, and I'm sure that will take shape.
That's right.
I would just quite like to emphasise that in the future there's been a slight change to the way the scrutiny sort of agendas are planned, and we've done that so that councillors have more input in these committee meetings on what is taken in the next committee meeting, if you see what I mean. So we'd like to give councillors more say what comes forward. A March is already shaping up, but in future committee meetings we will spend a bit more time on the work programme item to see if councillors have any suggestions, and they can liaise with heads of service at the time to sort of straighten out items sooner than has been done in the past. I also would like to draw councillors' attention to the scrutiny tracker. I've done a little bit of work on that just to make it clearer where the recommendations the committee's made have got to. So if you can see, some are shaded, and that means they've been complete really. So they've gone where they need to go. That might be executive or to officers, and then the ones that haven't been shaded yet are still being worked on. So councillors will see that as the committees progress, things will be added to that, recommendations that have been made. So it's just a bit clearer on where recommendations and outcomes have got to.
Okay, thank you. I would have thought that what we've talked about today will complete our work programme for the next 6 to 9 months. I think quite easily. I don't think we want to introduce too many additional topics before the end of the calendar year. But anybody else want to comment? Otherwise, thank you, Jasmine, for bringing that to our attention. And that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much, members.